Hello, good people. Today we're picking up our third lecture on the four last things and continuing on with a look at how God is our last end and all of the things that that entails. Last lecture, we were looking at this one, the paradox of life and death and how we search for meaning in this life and try to understand what last end means when we die and what, if anything, is on the other side of that death. Now, we segued into this one as well, right? When we talked about docta ignorantia, St. Augustine's brilliant idea that we finished up with, we're also trying to get a hold of what is that end going to look like for us? What does it mean? And we ended in some kind of perplexity there and sort of embraced that. Today, I want to move on to look at, as I spoiled in the last video, another thing we could try to do to understand this a little bit more. We could look at the way in which the goods that we value in this life, the goods that we pursue and acquire in an attempt to be happy, we should be able to see, we're going to try to see, a way in which our last end relates to those things. And specifically here I have in mind love. The way in which we love things will hopefully give us a little bit more insight into what we mean by God being our last end. And perhaps love is the solution to the riddle that we were stuck in at the end of the last lecture. Because the part of the docta ignorantia from St. Augustine is that we end in a state of both hope and despair, because we have a goal, but we have no idea how to reach it. We have no idea really what it is, other than that it is, and that it transcends all that we know. Well, maybe love is going to be a way to solve this, to make a little progress here, again, just by reason alone. Now, when we propose love as a candidate solution, we're not just pulling it out of a hat. It's not just random brainstorming. We set up this entire thing by looking at Aquinas' convertibility argument, which we first saw back in the fall semester, where to show the convertibility of being and goodness, Aquinas starts with the idea of desire. A thing is good insofar as it is desirable, and desirable insofar as it is perfect, because all things desire their own perfection. And from that you can build this idea that God is our last end. That's built into there. But that means that desire, wanting things, is very much tied to our last end and reaching it and whatever it is that's on the other side of this riddle of life and death. Well, that's all love is. Love is a wanting. It's a desire of a particular kind, depending on how we're going to use the word. And so we are looking at one of the essential components of the convertibility argument, and we're going to try to get a much better handle on what we mean by love. We're going to try to get a clearer sense of what we mean when we say love. What we'd like to end up with is this idea down here, that love gives meaning to life. But to do that, we're going to have to be a little bit careful in how we use the word love. Obviously, we use it in a lot of different ways, not just in English, but in every language ever, to describe the way we want different kinds of things. So, the love that gives meaning to life isn't going to be the way you love pizza, or the way you love your job, or sex, drugs, and rock and roll. We need to get into something more than that, I think. Something like love of family, love of wife and children, something. Love of friends. So we're going to look a little bit at the different kinds of loves. A reason to think this is going to work is what we did back in January with the three souls, when we were looking at the way Aristotle classifies living things into rational, animal, and vegetal. Those highest powers, the rational powers, are the things that mark our noblest and furthest reach of what we can do as living things, our intellect and will, our powers of knowing the true and loving the good. And so that's a reason to think that this is going to somehow work when we are engaging not just some of our powers, but all of our powers, our highest powers. And at the top of that scale is love. Well, then maybe we're onto something for for the meaning of life. Now, it is complicated because, as we said back with the three souls, our animal life and our rational life, or the way we interact with the universe as an animal and the way we interact with it as a rational, they're interwoven. So we could very, very crudely distinguish animal loves from rational loves, but in us they're going to be a little bit hard to separate. Here's an easy example. It's perfectly legitimate, perfectly reasonable to say that a dog loves its food and that a dog loves to play outside. And it takes pleasure in those things, it enjoys those things. Probably you don't love anything as much as a dog loves its food, for dog lovers out there. In a way, when you love pizza or food of your choice, you're not really doing anything different than what your dog is doing. There's a way in which you could look at it as a rational love of pizza. You could do a kind of analysis there, but for our purposes, I think it's enough to say that we have animal loves, and that our animal loves for things are basically the same as say dog love or whatever. The love that dogs have for their food. But we want more than that for meaning of life type stuff. If we only had loves at the dog level, then we wouldn't be engaging our highest powers, and we would be in some sense unfulfilled. Part of the convertibility argument is perfection, that all of our potencies are actualized, that we are realized in everything about us is realized, come to completion, come to fulfillment. So if we only love pizza, then intellect and will go unfulfilled. So let's flip over to the right side here and talk about loves a little bit more carefully. I think probably every philosophy and religion teacher in America laughed at the Super Bowl. If you ever take a basic philosophy class, probably at a liberal arts school or a Catholic college, probably any kind of Christian college, you're gonna take a class or two on these four loves that Super Bowl commercial went through. Of course, it was some sort of godless insurance program or whatever. I forget what the content was. Maybe it was Liberty Mutual. I don't remember anymore. But it was quite shocking to see Storge, Philia, Eros, and Agape discussed on a 30-second, $2 million ad or whatever the numbers were on that. But it's sort of commonplace to talk about the way in which the Greeks classified love with several different words. If you remember that commercial, it doesn't matter. It's okay if you don't. The basics are there on the screen. That was really just a stripped down version of the way C.S. Lewis talks about the four loves in a book that he wrote, I believe, in 1960 called Four Loves. And it's not the case that the Greeks, as a culture, as a people, had this really sophisticated terminology for love. I mean, just like us, they could use their words synonymously, they could use their words casually, they could use their words carelessly, just like we do. They were generally a little bit more systematically inclined than we are, I think, in some ways, but it's not the case that everyone who ever used the word storge in Greek meant one very specific kind of love. Sort of. So what you were really seeing there was C.S. Lewis's reconstruction of how to talk about love according to that model. The book Four Loves is brilliant. It's probably the kind of thing we should consider doing summer reading on here at our school. I'll probably be reading it at home with the family in the near future. It's brilliant. And what Lewis does with it, we can borrow a little bit here and sort of steal from what the Super Bowl was doing a little bit as well. Storge we can consider, or as Lewis considers it, as the affection, familial affection that children feel for their parents and parents for their children. Philia, again, just sort of restricting things a little bit. Philia, of all of them, is actually the most clearly defined. Philia is friendship. Philia is the love between equals. And we could look at the way Aristotle breaks down philia into several different kinds. We might do that later. That's the kind of thing we look at in 11th grade, actually, with ethics. Philia is very important. Obviously, citizens of the United States will hopefully recognize it. It is hidden in the word Philadelphia. Eros, probably the one most linguistically familiar to us. It's where we get the word erotic. Eros is romantic love, sexual love, although not necessarily just sexual. It's not just sexual desire. Certainly the way Lewis means it, it's more than just sexual desire, but romantic love. The way you love your girlfriend, your spouse. And then finally, agape, which is, as Lewis says, this is the highest one, and it's the self-sacrificial love, the love that gives with no expectation of return, the love that lives for the other. When Aquinas defines love in the high sense, the sense that we're going to really care about, he uses this one down here. Love is when we seek the good of the other for the other's sake, not for our own. And it's not to take pleasure in another, and it's not to enjoy the company of another. It's to will the good for someone else, to seek good for them. And agape is the one that comes closest to that. As Lewis would have it, that's the best way to think about the way God loves us, and some goal for us, some noble goal. So we are. When we're talking about love giving meaning to life, these loves, as Lewis would have them, or if we just sort of moved away from categorizing them, we could actually just look at it in every kind of good has a corresponding kind of love. There are as many kinds of love as there are kinds of goods. They each, in their own way, fulfill us. They fill up part of what we are. But especially when you get into things like philia, and agape, we want to make the really, really strong claim that these loves fulfill us in a way that the others don't. They make our lives greater. They ennoble us. They make us more than what we are. In some sense, you could say that you are what you love. More than just you are what you eat. You are what you love. If you love base things, small things, you are base and only small and base things, then you are base and small. You're reducing yourself. You're limiting yourself. And when you love great things, and when you love noble things, you become great, you become noble. You're transformed by the things that you love. This is gettable. You can see this by reason alone. Maybe not easily. I think we live in a time of great confusion about this. But also, you're ennobled by the way in which you are loved. So it's not just a matter of what you do. You are also made greater by the way in which people love you. If you can see it in the negative, I think. If you are only ever loved as an object of desire, or as an object of pleasure, and I don't necessarily mean sexual, we can mean that, but also just, people only love you insofar as you're fun to hang out with, then they don't love you that much. It's pretty superficial. And your life is not as great, as noble, as good, as happy as it could be. So this ennobling or this empowering of love works in both directions. The love that people have for you makes you greater, and the greater the kind of love, the greater you are. And the way that you love, the things that you love, and the way that you love makes you greater. So in some sense, I've organized these badly. They should probably flip philia and eros for the point that I want to make here. But you should be loved as an equal. Love of friendship. Lewis spends a lot of time on love of friendship. He very rightly, I think, points out how pitifully we treat friendship as compared to a lot of ancient cultures, which view it as, in some sense, the pinnacle. Aristotle basically views friendship, or one particular kind of friendship, as the pinnacle of human life. He's on to something really important there, something that we want to look at here. But the way in which you sacrifice for others, the way in which you have friendships between equals, pursuing great things together, also the way you have familial affection and romantic love, all those things are ennobling in some way. They can be. They all make us more. They all make us greater. So love does give meaning to life. Now, for it to solve the problem of life and death, though, for it to really be the solution to that despair that we found at the end of our search in the last lecture. That love would have to, in some sense, transcend death. The problem is, everyone you love and everyone who will ever love you is going to die. Death always wins. As far as we can see in this life, in this world, by reason alone, death does get the final say over love. It doesn't matter how much you love your children. They're going to die. It doesn't matter how much they love you. You're going to die. There are no loves that make it so that we transcend the universe. Maybe in some partial way, and they point in that direction in a lot of different ways. You do a whole philosophy of love, far beyond what we're going to look at here on this little slide. But in order for love to really work as the solution, right? There's a reason we're candidates over here. In order for love to really work, it would have to be a love that can survive death, that can transcend it. It would have to be something that conquers death. Do we have any reason to think that happens? Not by reason alone, I don't think. It would also have to be, if you look back at some of the previous slides, if you remember some of the things that we were saying about, in order to segue into docta ignorantia, part of the problem, the limit of all good things, this applies to loves too. Loves are finite. Loves are limited. They don't fulfill us in every way. They only fulfill us in partial ways. And so what we would actually need is not just a love that transcends death. It would have to be an infinite love, an infinite and eternal one that does in fact fulfill us in every way, because that's the only thing that brings us to our actual last end. And we don't have a really good, clear reason, I think, by natural reasoning, to think that such a thing exists. Possibly, with a really rigorous natural theology, you could prove that such a thing exists. I'm not 100% sure about that. At the very least, like some of the points we made last lecture, there's not a great consensus on it. Well, hopefully it's clear where we're going with this in terms of revelation, right? The big reveal at the end of all of this is to say, well, we sort of stop here, recognizing the paradox of life and death, recognizing that we have a last end, that we can't really know very much. We can only see it in the negative. We know we can't see how to reach it. It seems to have something to do with love. We would need a love that is infinite and eternal in order for us to survive death and to reach that last end. Does it exist? I don't know. We're just sort of stuck wanting it and asking. We're stuck in a state of existential crisis. This is another way to understand what revelation is. When we talk about the gospel, the good news, you can mean that it's good news in more than one way. One of them is God doesn't just leave us alone crying out into the universe, what am I? Where am I going? What do I do? Revelation is God's answer. It's his initiative. Our last end comes to meet us. That's pretty good news. So, revelation is primarily God making himself known. He shares himself with us. We cannot know what he is, only what he is not. Even by the greatest and most rigorous of natural theologies, we come up against really hard limits on what we can know about him. Well, if he's our last end, then by showing us who he is, he's also showing us who we are and where we are going. Revelation includes this idea of destination and road and how to get there. He comes down from heaven and he shows us how to get there. It's also the significance of this quotation. Very famous, very overused, and I think sometimes we don't really think through what we mean when we say it. It's actually a really big deal to say that God is love. When we say that God is love, we are essentially answering this whole situation over here. God is the love that gives meaning to life. God is that thing on the other side of the riddle of life and death. Somehow, God loving us and us loving God is the answer to all of this. That's what he comes to show us. That's what is revealed. And once you know that, it's obviously one of the most famous things about Christianity. It's one of the most famous things about the gospel. Well, then it casts a long shadow back through all of these slides. This is why it's a little hard to tell if our natural theology ends in uncertainty or ends in knowledge, because we kind of know where we're going the whole time, right? But this is how we transition out of the struggle for meaning and docta ignorantia and hope and despair. God intervenes. This is revelation. Now we can go back and we can look at, all right, what does God say about all of this? We can now positively state what our last end is. Hopefully, if you were really paying attention in the fall, then you can see the symmetry here. Because when we begin our natural theology, we do a first mover argument and all of the various exercises that go with that. And it ends in an incomplete partial knowledge. We cannot know what God is, only what God is not. We're doing the exact same thing here when it comes to our last end. In some really important way, we also can't know what our last end is. We can only know what our last end is not. It requires something more to know what God is, and it requires something more to know what our last end is, positively speaking. And that's what this means. Supplying for all of the deficiencies of human reason. All right, so the next set of slides, we're going to begin to look then, or the next set of lectures, we're going to start looking concretely at what does God reveal? What does that last end look like? How do we get there? And that's where we'll get into heaven and hell and judgment and purgatory and all the rest. All right? So we're going to stop there. Thank you, and I will see you soon.